therapist Kristen Jacobson.
Hey everyone, I'm Kristen, the anxiety therapist, and today I want to talk about the relationship between alcohol and anxiety. This video is going to be sort of part educational, but also part sharing my own personal experience. There's been this sort of sober curious movement, which is a growing trend toward sort of reevaluating our relationship with alcohol. And so for those of us who struggle with anxiety, I just wanted to provide you with some information and then share my own experience with, I guess, being sober curious and kind of my own relationship with alcohol. First off, when it comes to alcohol and anxiety, obviously alcohol is going to have an initial calming effect. It suppresses our central nervous system, gives us that euphoric feeling, relaxes us, that kind of keeps the anxiety at bay. But then there's this paradox of what we call rebound anxiety. And this is what happens after we consume alcohol. This can happen the next morning or even as we're sort of metabolizing alcohol in our sleep. But basically it leads to increased heart rate, hypertension, and a spike in anxiety levels. Why this happens is because the alcohol alters the balance of neurotransmitters in our brain, such as GABA and glutamate. And these neurotransmitters are directly involved in regulating anxiety. So whenever somebody is taking, let's say, medication for anxiety or depression or any other psychotropic medication, it's acting on those neurotransmitters. Just like the medication helps to regulate the neurotransmitters, alcohol kind of throws them out of whack. And so over time, if we're regularly consuming alcohol, this can lead to our brains becoming dependent on the alcohol to sort of maintain that neurotransmitter balance, which in turn just exacerbates anxiety during periods when we're not drinking. So alcohol also affects our sleep quite a bit, and sleep is crucial to anxiety management. It's sort of this vicious cycle. So good quality sleep, as we know, is sort of a nightly reset for our brain. And this is absolutely essential for emotional regulation and stress management. When we drink alcohol, a lot of times it will make us fall asleep more quickly, but this alcohol-induced sleep is very fragmented. So what happens is we have less REM sleep, and that REM sleep is really what's critical for cognitive functions like learning, memory, emotional processing. When we're sleeping, our brain sort of files away things that have happened that day, hopefully in a functional way, and alcohol can sort of interfere with this. And so this can have a domino effect on anxiety. Without that restorative power of quality sleep, our ability to process and cope with stress really diminishes, and this can make anxiety more difficult to manage and can really kind of exacerbate the symptoms. The last thing I want to talk about is alcohol's interference with psychotropic medication. So a lot of people don't realize that taking an antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication such as Zoloft, Prozac, Lexapro, Effexor, Buspar, alcohol can really interfere with those medications. Because these medications modulate our neurotransmitters in our brain and alcohol interferes with that, it can really either have an interaction with the medications or it can really diminish their effectiveness. And so either way, you're on medication to help with your anxiety or depression, and then you introduce alcohol into the mix, it's sort of working against that medication that is ultimately supposed to make you feel better. So I want to talk a little bit about this sober curious movement. And this isn't about like absolute abstinence, but it's really more about a thoughtful exploration of what our relationship with alcohol is. A lot of times when we reflect on this, it really reveals how intertwined alcohol and anxiety have become. Alcohol is very embedded in our social culture, and it's something that people don't really think twice about. Making the decision to become sober curious can really be intimidating because it's sort of going against the grain. It's going against social norms. But in doing so, we can actually really see the benefits. And that includes improved sleep quality, more mental clarity, less fogginess, and just a more authentic connection with our emotions and coping mechanisms. So we want to make sure that this exploration of being sober curious is definitely not about judgment or prescription, but rather about curiosity and personal growth, and just seeing what your relationship with alcohol is and how that might be impacting you. So I just want to share a little bit about my own journey with being sober curious. At the end of last year, I was kind of reflecting on the role of alcohol in my life, and it just became so habitual where, after a long day, I would have a glass or two or even 3 glasses of wine just to kind of relax. And my kids would get home from school and they were very overstimulating, and so just that the alcohol would sort of relax my nervous system so that I could get through the evening. And I recognized that this was probably, I could still get up and function and do my job well, but it probably wasn't benefiting me in the way that I was really hoping it would. It was more of like that instant gratification of, all right, I feel better for a couple hours, but then I started to really see the effects in my sleep and just that sort of a little bit of fogginess the next day. And it wasn't enough to motivate me to completely abstain because I was still functioning well, or so I thought. At the end of last year, my husband made a commitment to stop drinking. And so I decided, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to commit to 30 days and just see what happens. So January 21st of this year, I remember putting a glass of wine on the table. I was down in Florida for a conference and I looked at it and I was like, you know what? This is it. This is the last glass of wine I'm going to have for at least the next 30 days. So that was January 21st. And now we're over 2 months later. And I just wanted to share with you kind of how my experience has been, because I was by no means an alcoholic, but did I have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol? I would say so. And so in not drinking for those 30 days, I've really reaped the benefits more than I thought I would. And I also just didn't miss it as much as I thought. I think there's a difference between being addicted to a substance and then having it be more of a crutch, like an unhealthy coping skill or a habit. And so I think for a lot of us, it's not that we need to go to rehab where we wouldn't identify as alcoholics, but there are some problematic behaviors when it comes to drinking. So what I have experienced over the past 2 months is definitely better sleep quality. It's a lot easier for me to wake up in the mornings. I've also noticed that my brain just feels clearer. Like I feel like I'm just quicker. I remember things a lot more. There's just a lot more mental clarity there. And then a couple things that were sort of unexpected was that I've found it a lot easier to be mindful, meaning like in the present moment, and to practice gratitude. Because when we're using alcohol as sort of a coping mechanism to numb out some of those negative feelings, we're unable to experience those positive feelings to their greatest extent. And when we're numbing the negative, we're also numbing the positive. And I was kind of reflecting and realized that, I was no longer sort of making it through the day looking forward to having that drink or a few drinks at the end of the night, which sort of took away from my experience of just daily living. So not having that as sort of like my reward at the end of the day or something to look forward to, it allowed me to really kind of be present and take note of what was going on throughout my day that was actually a lot more joyful, and the little things that I was kind of overlooking when I was drinking. The last thing I want to mention is just the increase in energy level. This could also be because I started working out again, but whereas I would absolutely need a cup of coffee by 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, since I've cut out alcohol, I can kind of take it or leave it. I definitely get that afternoon slump a little bit, especially after lunch, and that's normal. We all sort of just physiologically, we all experience that, but it's definitely not as intense as when I was consuming alcohol. So just wanted to share my own experience. This is very vulnerable for me. There was a lot of kind of shame attached to the drinking because it's like, I'm this therapist trying to help other people, and try to guide them on what to do. And, I'm not even doing healthy things myself. But that said, I think this also just, having the own personal experience really allows me to understand what my clients are going through when they're struggling with it, whether it's alcohol, or I have a client right now who's struggling to stop using cannabis. So it doesn't really matter what it is. And the last thing I want to leave you with is just wanted to recommend this book. This really helped me on my journey. I am in no way affiliated with this author. I don't get any kickbacks or anything. I just think it's a good book. It's called This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. And it just gives you a lot of the science behind what alcohol does to your body. It's not judgmental or shaming in any way. It just opens your mind to sort of alternative ways of thinking. So I would love to hear about your own experiences with alcohol. If you've ever considered being sober curious, what's holding you back? Because it's a tough change to make, especially in our culture. And yeah, if you have any other questions, leave them in the comments section, and I will talk to you all next week.